We continue now at the top of Daf Kuf Beis Amud Aleph Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 102a. On the previous Amud, Rav said that Moshe Rabbeinu was a Kohen Gadol. He was considered to be a high priest, and the Gemara is in the middle of asking a question on that from a Brisa. The Brisa says, who's the one that quarantined Miriam? It can't be that it was Moshe, because Moshe was a Zar. He was a non-Kohen. Ve'ein Zar roes ha-negoim. A Zar, a non-Kohen, is not allowed to see, is not allowed to inspect Negoim, which is Tzaras. And the Brisa continues, Vim Tomar Aaron is skir, if you're going to say that Aaron is the one that quarantined his sister Miriam. Aaron Karovu, Aaron was a relative. Vein Karov, Roa Esanagayim, and a relative is not allowed to inspect the Tzaras. Ella rather covered Gadol Cholak La HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave Miriam a great honor. La Miriam, he gave Miriam a great honor. Osa Shah at that time. Ani Kohen. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, I'm a Kohen. Va'ani Maskira. Ani Cholta. Va'ani Potra. I'm the Kohen. I'm going to quarantine her. I'm going to decide whether she will be declared to have leprosy, and I will decide whether she will be exempt. And the Gemara says, Katani Miyas, nevertheless, what do we learn in this Brisa? Moshe Zar, it says that Moshe was a non-Kohen. Ve'ein Zar roes ha-negoim, and a Zar is not able to see, to inspect the Negoim. And again, that is a question against Rav, who says that Moshe Rabbeinu was considered to be a Kohen Gadol. And the Gemara continues and answers, Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, Shani Maros Negoim, it's different by inspecting the Negoim. The Aaron Uvanov Ksuvin beParsha, because it's written in the Parsha that it has to be Aaron Uvanov, Aaron and his sons, and therefore would not apply to Moshe Rabbeinu regardless. And the Gemara continues, Meisvei, we have a question from the following Brisa, Chamish Samachos Haisa Elisheva Yisrael al Benos Yisrael. On that day of the inauguration of the Mishkan, Elisheva had 5 more reasons to be happy than other daughters of Israel, and they were as follows. Yevam Melech, number 1, her brother-in-law was the king. Elisheva's brother-in-law was Moshe Rabbeinu. Elisheva was married to Aaron. Isha Kohen Gadol, her husband was the Kohen Gadol, that's Aaron. Binah, her son, Skan, he was the vice Kohen Gadol. Ben Binah, and her grandson, Mashuach Melchama, he was the anointed Kohen for war. Ve'achiha, Nasi, and her brother, that's Nachshon ben Aminadav, he was the Nasi, Nasi Shevet, he was the leader of the Shevet. Va'avela al shnei boneh, but she wasn't mourning over 2 of her sons. Katani mihas, nevertheless, what does it say in this Brisa? It says Yevam Melech. It says her brother-in-law was a king. Now that implies Melech in Kohen Gadol. It implies that he's a king, but he was not a Kohen Gadol. The Gemara says Ema. We can say that the Brisa really means to say Af Melech. He even was a king, but he was a Kohen Gadol as well. And the Gemara continues, Ketanai, this issue is actually a machlokas tanoim. The pasuk says, Vayichar af Hashem b'Moshe. It says that Hashem became angry at Moshe. This was when Moshe refused or hesitated to deliver the message of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to Paro. And the Brisa brings a machlokas tanoim. Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha Omer. Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha says, Kol charon af shebatorah. Anytime it says charon af, like in this pasuk, Vayichar af Hashem, anytime it says that in the Torah, Nemar bo Rosham, there's some effect that is stated from that anger. V'zelo nemar bo Rosham, but in this pasuk there is no effect that is stated from that anger of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Omer, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai says, Af ze nemar bo Rosham. Here also there was an effect. Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, Halo Aaron achicha halevi. It says Aaron, your brother the Levi. V'halo Kohen. Why is it calling Aaron a Levi? He's really a Kohen. Hachi kamar. This is what it's saying. Ani amarti, I said, Ata Kohen v'hu Levi, that you should be the Kohen and he should be the Levi. But achsha, but now that you've caused this anger, hu Kohen ve'ata Levi. He's going to be the Kohen and you're going to be the Levi. The Chachamim say, Lo niskahin Moshe elo shivas yimei hamiluim bilvad. Moshe was only a Kohen for the 7 days of the Miluim. V'yesh omrim, and others say, Lo paska kahuna elo mizaro shel Moshe. The kahuna only ceased from the children of Moshe, but he was always considered to be a Kohen. Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, Moshe ishu elokim bonav yikru al shevet halevi. It says that Moshe, his sons, followed shevet Levi. V'yomer, and it also says Moshe v'Aaron b'chohanov u'Shmuel b'korei shemo. Again, it says that Moshe was a Kohen, and therefore, according to the Yesh Omrim, we see that Moshe Rabbeinu was a Kohen, and that again argues with the other Tanoim in the Brisa. That's the Machlokas Tanoim. The Gemara continues, Ma'ai v'yomer, why is it that the Yesh Omrim, why are they bringing 2 psukim to show that Moshe was a Kohen? First you bring the pasuk of Moshe Israel Elokim Bonav Yikro Al Shevet Alevi, and then another pasuk, Moshe v'Aaron b'choanav u'Shmuel b'korei shemo. And the Gemara answers to that, because if you're going to say as far as the first pasuk, L'doros hu dechsiv, that's just written for future generations, meaning to say it's not referencing Moshe Rabbeinu's status, it's just talking about his children. So v'yomer, that's why I bring the second pasuk, Moshe v'Aaron b'choanav, again indicating that Moshe Rabbeinu was in fact a Kohen. And Rashi explains, V'chitema ledoros u'dechsiv, you might say that the first pasuk is ledoros, meaning la'achar zman nichtav. That means to say that the pasuk was written later. Keshayu mi'achsem es ha'kahuna v'es ha'leviyah, when they're going through the genealogies of kahuna and leviyah. U'lahachi nakat bonav yikaru. That's why it says that his sons are going to be al shevet halevi. To lo havalei lememar Moshe yikra al shevet halevi. It's not going to say Moshe is going to be called on shevet Levi. Sharei lo kayim, because he wasn't around at that time. V'yein lo lomer ela al hamisyachsim. It only makes sense to say it in terms of the genealogy, in terms of his descendants, and therefore that pasuk again that says that his children bonav yikaru al shevet halevi, that pasuk doesn't necessarily prove anything about Moshe Rabbeinu himself, and that's why again an additional pasuk is brought. And the Gemara continues, V'chol charon af shebetorah nemar bo roshim. Is it really true that anytime the Torah uses the term charon af, there's some kind of an effect? V'aksiv, but it's written in the pasuk, Vayetze min paro b'chor yaf. It says Moshe left from before Paro, and he was angry. V'lo amar le v'lo midi. But again, there was no effect. He didn't say anything to him. He just left in anger, and apparently there's no effect. And the Gemara says, Amar Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish says, Staro v'yatza. He actually slapped him, and he went out. So there was an effect. The Gemara asks, Umi Amar Reish Lakish hachi. Did Reish Lakish really say that? But it's also written in V'nitzavta l'kraso al sfas hayor. It says you're going to stand to greet him by the banks of the river. V'yamar Reish Lakish, and Reish Lakish said about that, Melechu v'hizber lo panim. He's a king, you have to show him respect. That goes against what Reish Lakish is saying here about slapping Paro. But Rabbi Yochanan Amar, now Rabbi Yochanan says on that pasuk, Roshahu, actually no, Paro is wicked, v'heiz ponachabo, and you should not treat him with respect. But in any case, it would seem to contradict in terms of Reish Lakish. And the Gemara says, Epoch, just reverse the opinions. It's actually Reish Lakish who says Roshahu v'heiz ponachabo, and that's consistent with Reish Lakish who says Staro v'yatza, that he slapped him and he went out. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Yanai. Rabbi Yanai says, Liolam te'emas malchus alecha. The fear of the kingship should always be upon you. T'chsiv, as it's written in the pasuk, V'yardu kol avadecha ela elai. It says, all of your servants will come down to me. That's how he spoke to Paro. But he didn't say that Paro, you're going to come down to me in the end. V'ilu l'didei lo kamarle. He didn't say it to him. That shows a certain respect for Paro as the king. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Mehach. Rabbi Yochanan says from here, from the following pasuk, V'yad Hashem hoisa el Eliyahu v'yishanis mosna Yoretz lifnei Achav. It says that Eliyahu ran before Achav, showed a certain amount of respect to Achav as a king. And the Gemara continues, Amar Ula says, Bikesh Moshe Malchus v'lo nasnu lom. Moshe wanted the kingship and they didn't give it to him. T'chsiv, as it's written, Al tikrav halom, don't come close halom, ve'ein halom ela Malchus. And halom is really a reference to the kingship. Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, Mi anochi Hashem Elokim v'gomer ki havi asani ad halom. Who am I that you have brought me ad halom? And again, that also is a reference to the kingship. The full pasuk over there is talking about David HaMelech, Vayavo HaMelech David. Taking a look at the full pasuk, Vayavo HaMelech David, Vayeshev lifnei Hashem, Vayomer mi anochi Hashem Elokim u'mevesi ki haviosani ad halom. So you see, halom again is a reference to kingship. The Gemara continues, Mesev Rava asks on this. We brought just above, Rabbi Yishmael Omer Yevama Melech. Rabbi Yishmael says that her brother-in-law was the king. We just brought above that Elisheva's brother-in-law was the king. That shows that in fact Moshe Rabbeinu was a king. And the Gemara says, Amar Rava says, Lo ulazaro ka'amar. What we are referring to over here is for him and his children. He himself was a king, but it was not passed on to his descendants. The Gemara continues and asks, V'chol heicha d'chsiv halom l'dorosu. Is it really true that anytime it says halom, it means for kingship for future generations? V'hagabe shol d'chsiv, but by shol it's written haba od halom ish. It uses the word halom, who in zarolo, and over there he was a king, but his descendants, his children, they were not kings. And the Gemara continues and answers, if you want, I could say, Hahava Ishboshes. It's not true. There was Ishboshes, who was the son of Shaul, and he was a king. And if you want, we could say, Shani Shaul. It's different by Shaul. Da'afila begaviolo come, because the kingship didn't even really continue with him himself. Kid Rebbe Lazar Amar Rabbi Chanina, like Rebbe Lazar says, that Rabbi Chanina says, B'shah poskim gedula la'adam poskim lo lazaru atsof kol hadoros. When they give greatness to a person, they give it to him and his descendants for all generations. Shenamar, as it says in the pasuk, Lo yigra mitzadik einov v'yas melachim lakise v'gomer. Again, it says that it will not cease, it will continue. But v'im heges daito. But if he becomes arrogant, then Hakadosh Baruch Hu mashpilo. Then Hakadosh Baruch Hu lowers him. Shenamar, as it says in the pasuk, these are both psukim from Eov. It says in the pasuk v'masurim bazikim yilochtun b'chavlei oni, that they will be bound with cords of affliction, and this was the case with Shaul HaMelech. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Bali Mumin, Bain Bali Mumin V'chulu, with regards to Kohanim who have blemishes, whether it's temporary blemishes or permanent blemishes, they get a share in the Karbanos. And the Gemara says, Menohani Mili, from where do we know this? The Tanu Rabbanon, because the rabbis taught, Kol Zocher, the Pasuk says Kol Zocher, L'Rabos Bali Mumin, that includes Bali Mumin. L'mayin, for what? Ila Achila, if it's to eat from the Karbanos, Harei Kvar Nemar Lechem Elokav Mikadshei HaKadoshim Yochel. It already says that in the Pasuk. Elo Lechaluka, rather it's to get a share in the Karbanos. Tanyidach, we learned in another brisa, Kol Zachar, it says in the pasuk Kol Zachar. These are different psukim that say Kol Zachar. As Rashi says, Kol Zachar Kama b'mincha ksiv, b'tzav esaron, the first one's by mincha, and then Kol Zachar Tinyana, the second one is b'chatos ksiv, it's written by chatos, v'ashlishi b'asham, we'll see the third one, that's written by asham. In any case, again, the Gemara continues, Tanya Idach, we learned in another brisa, Kol Zachar l'rabos b'alei mumin, it says Kol Zachar to include b'alei mumin, l'mai for what? Ila achila harei kvar amar, for eating, that's already said, Ila chaluka harei kvar amar, for getting a share, that's already said, Sheyachol ein li alatam v'nasa b'almum. Now I might think it's only if somebody was whole and then got a blemish. B'almum meikaru minayin, how do you know even if he got it from the outset he had a blemish? Talmud lomar Kol Zachar, the pasuk says Kol Zachar. Tanya idach, we learned in another brisa, Kol Zachar, again it says Kol Zachar, a different Kol Zachar. L'rabos b'almum, that includes a kohen with a blemish, l'mai for what? Ila achila harei kvar amor, if it's for eating it already says it. V'ila chaluka harei kvar amor, if it's for a share it already says it. V'ila b'almum meikaru harei kvar amor, if it's for a b'almum from the outset he was always a b'almum, it's also already said. Sheyachol, but one might think ein li ala b'almum kavua, that it only applies to a b'almum who has a permanent blemish. B'almum over minayin, how do you know even a temporary blemish he gets a share in the karbanos? Talmud lomar Kol Zachar, the pasuk says Kol Zachar. The Gemara asks Klap Elai, isn't this going in the wrong direction? It should be that I might have thought only a temporary blemish. How do I know even a permanent blemish? A permanent blemish is less likely. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Sheshes says, Epach, reverse it. Really it means to say I might have only known about mum over, even to include Balmum Kavua. Again, that comes from Kol Zachar. However, the Gemara has another answer. Rav Ashi says, Liolam lo sepuch. Really, you don't need to reverse it. V'yitzrich, and it's necessary. Salkadai t'chamina, one might have thought. And Rashi explains, Lo sepuch v'yitzrich kra l'midrashei hachi. The pasuk is needed as follows. Ma'u d'tema kra kama kavuahu. In the first pasuk, it's talking about, again, when it's a permanent blemish, the achshir achmana, there the Torah says he can have a share in the karbanos. Chasalem mishum de lesle hatera l'machar l'yom ha'acharina. That's because the Torah has mercy on him, so to speak, because he's not going to be permitted tomorrow or in the future. Aval over, but if it's a temporary blemish, the isle hatera l'machras, where it will be permitted tomorrow, it will be permitted in the future, maybe you wouldn't think so. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuf Beis Amid Beis.